We're here in Louisville at Neat. This is one of our favorite bars, and actually we're next door to Neat in their bottle shop. Now, there is really nowhere else in the country quite like this. They only sell vintage whiskey. There are a couple of new whiskeys up front, but we won't talk about this. This is whiskey history right here, American whiskey history. And who better to sit here with than with the whiskey history embodied in a man, Bernie Lubbers.
Whiskey history, it almost rhymes.
Yeah, right. But also a great musician and raconteur, if I could say.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And,
did you just call me a name?
The man of a million.
That I'm not going to use.
I don't know if I should be ashamed or
a million
proud.
titles. But what is your official title? What do you do with Heaven Hill?
Well, I'm simply the whiskey ambassador. There's two of us, myself and Jack Choate on the West Coast, but I'm known as the whiskey professor. So that's what people have been calling me since 2006.
Yeah. So what does that involve? What do you? So obviously you know Heaven Hill whiskey, but you know more than everything. Right?
Well, and that's not So Jimmy Russell, when I started in the industry, I worked at Jim Beam over there with Fred No.
Yeah.
And Jimmy and Fred, they took the pressure off right immediately.
Okay.
Because they said, well, Fred goes, well, you ain't gonna know everything. And Jimmy's like, we said Whiskey Fest, and Fred's like, hey, Jimmy, Bernie's going to be working with us. Jimmy Russell, And he goes, well, young man, I learned something today. He says, you're going to learn something every day. Mm-hmm. He says, you're never going to learn. He says, so you don't know it. You don't have to know it today. So, boy, what a cool thing to say.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know much, but Fred goes, as long as you know more than the people in the room, and if you don't, you got me in the phone and you can text me and I'll send you an answer or whatever.
Right.
So over the time, when we started this 2006, let's just think about this. There were only 10 distilleries in Kentucky, owned by 6 different companies. Mm-hmm. So Heaven Hill, Wild Turkey, Jim Beam, Four Roses, Maker's Mark, Sazerac. That's just 6 legacy distilleries. Brown Forman. There's only 6.
Yeah.
There are the 6 that held the bookmark, right? So between Prohibition and to today, there's only 6 that survived that. Yeah. And allowed the 2,600 other distilleries. And now there's 100 distilleries in Kentucky.
Right. Yeah.
So think about that. There's of those 6 legacy distilleries. If it wasn't for them, there wouldn't be a Neat bourbon bar and bottle shop. There wouldn't be all these. It wouldn't be. There wouldn't be 2.5 million tourists coming to Louisville, Kentucky every year.
Yeah.
This wouldn't happen. So you got to give your due to the 6 legacy distilleries.
How did you get involved in whiskey? What was your journey up to that point where you're taking advice from Jimmy Russell? Yeah, because I'm
also very curious about myself.
I
wish I could.
They give a lot of advice. It's up to you to take it, right? Okay. I got the industry kind of came to me. So in 2005, Jim Beam was looking for someone to represent their brands in neighborhood bars around the state of Kentucky, and kind of a personality job. Kind of you show up. You arrange tastings, events, things like that, and in these little neighborhood joints. So it's pretty cool. I didn't know that much about bourbon. I grew up in Kentucky, and my dad and my mom both drank bourbon. And you go around. But I did 20 years as a professional stand-up comedian.
Oh, is that right?
Did you?
Yeah.
No kidding.
Wow.
So that's what I did before this. And so I can stand up in front of 2 people or 2,000 people or 200 people or whatever, and I can talk, right?
I love it.
And as I can fake it till I make it, right? So as long as I say it with confidence and say it entertaining, and they would send me these decks, the PowerPoints that the marketing team would send down, and people were drinking bourbon, right? Vodka was the big thing, rum was the big thing,
right.
Whites.
And so, they were the most boring presentations. We set the fermenters at 75 degrees or whatever. Sure. We drop the grains at this temperature at this during the cook. Yeah. And I'm sitting there as a comedian going, shit, I just figured you made it good, I mean, you've been around a while. I assume you did it well. Tell me something that I can really, do.
Yeah.
So working with Fred, and then Jerry Dalton was also a master distiller there.
Okay.
And he gave me a copy, which I carry around to this day in my backpack, take it everywhere all over the world, everywhere I go, every tasting, everything, because it's the standards of identity. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
And he said words on labels mean things. So he'd point to a label and say, see that word, Kentucky, straight, bourbon, whiskey. Those all mean, see that bottled and bond? That means something by law.
Yeah.
And I went, that's going to be my thing, you know?
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, no one was talking about that back then. And then I researched this and found that Pappy Van Winkle had taken ads out for Old Fitzgerald on how to read a label. And I'm like, ooh, I'm onto something here, because, you know, he was a great showman and a great person. Yeah. So, you know, but things went away. So I just made that. And then my first love was Bottle and Bond. And I told Fred, and then when I did that job for a year and a half, and then I was hired to be the first ambassador that wasn't a family member or a distiller. So there was 3 of us that got hired.
Okay.
At Jim Beam, and I didn't realize that till years later. I would have been too scared to take it.
Yeah.
But you know, as a comedian, sometimes timing is good. So and luck.
Yeah, I've heard. Yeah.
So Fred's picture was going to go on the side of the Jim Beam bottle as the 7th generation master distiller.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So he went on a world tour for Jim Beam, and they needed somebody. They saw that the sales of the small batch, Knob Creek and the small batch, were ticking up.
Yeah.
And they were going to invest in that. So they said, well, he's going to be busy doing that. We need people to talk about Knob Creek and the small batch. So they hired us to do that. And I made words on labels my thing.
Okay. Were you, so growing up here in Kentucky, or in the heart of bourbon country right here in Louisville, were you like an enthusiast of whiskey before you got into the industry, or did the industry kind of like bring you into whiskey and you found your love afterwards?
So I drank beer and bourbon.
Okay.
So I got this ring here. See? It says Falls City Brewing Company.
Yeah.
My dad worked there for 45 years. It says 45 years of service. That's right here in Louisville, Falls City. So we're in the Falls City. That's the reason the city's here is the falls of the Ohio Rivers here, right?
Right, yeah.
So you had to portage your boat here and pull it out.
Yeah.
So there's Falls City Beer, Falls City Fence, Falls City Electric.
Okay, yeah, sure.
So Falls City Beer.
Okay.
And then my grandfather was one of the 13 German saloon keepers that started the brewery in 1905. So I've always had beer and things. So growing up, my dad would bring home like dartboards with Falls City on it and whatever.
Yeah.
And so I always thought that was fascinating, you know, and he'd bring his stuff home. So getting, you know, and then when I got older, and of course, legal drinking age.
Of course, yes.
College and that.
By the books over here.
Yeah, but my mom and dad both drank beer and bourbon, so I naturally gravitated to the same thing.
Yeah.
And doing stand-up comedy, you know, I did a routine in my act, which kind of got me into the industry. For me to like talk to them about working. Yeah. Because the last 10, 15 minutes of my act was about my dad, who drank bourbon and he drank a quart a day, right? You know,
he liked it a lot.
Yeah. And it's a whole routine about that. He was 90 some years old still, but you know what else you gonna do? There's nothing much to do. You know, so it was a whole routine about that. So I got known as a comedian about my dad, who, you know, I did a routine about bourbon. They said, well, hey, you can at least you're entertaining people. You're on stage drinking bourbon.
Yeah.
And I would always tell the crowd that let's get a shot, you know, let's do a toast to my dad at the end of the show. And so, so that got there. Oh, he's doing, you know, so we can sell some stuff through this guy. Right?
Yeah. Okay.
So that's kind of how I got into the business.
Okay.
Got it.
Now you are also a musician.
Yes.
And can you talk about how that intersects with your whiskey interest? Because it's very deep.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, everything's an evolution and everything. And, you know, in this world, you create your own, you manifest your own destiny, right?
I'm a firm believer in that.
You bring it, you bring it out to the universe. You bring it yourself. You know, I worked at a bank when I first got out of college, and that's not for me, you know. And so, being a stand-up comic, you know, I didn't become famous being a comic, but it got me this job. Right? Yeah. I've always enjoyed what I do. I love what I do. I've always, you know, how many people can say that for a living they do what they love to do?
Yeah. Very few.
So then when I was hired and I come across these musicians, my buddy Hickory Vaught and Sprout and Steve Cooley and all these people, and they were playing in a bar.
Okay.
And I'm like, bourbon I've always loved bluegrass music.
Right.
You know, when the Will the Circle Be Unbroken album came out in the 70s, you know, and then you had the Bonnie and Clyde movie that brought Flatt and Scruggs to the forefront. And then, of course, Alison Krauss and then Brother Where Art Thou and all that kind of stuff. Now you got Billy Strings and Molly Tuttle and all that stuff. So everything's so I'm like, when I do events, I'm hiring them. Right?
Yeah.
Because what goes with Kentucky bourbon better than Kentucky bluegrass music?
Of course.
Right? And then
live music and whiskey, that's one of the greatest
and part of my comedy act, a lot of times I play guitar too, and I played music. I played in bars too, just played music and all that.
I was going to ask, guitar is your main instrument?
Guitar, yeah.
And voice, right?
So I was the lead singer of the Ball and Bomb Boys.
Yeah.
And so so I just had it, and then they'd go, "Well, you play?" And I'm like, well, "I don't play bluegrass, right?" You know, I mean, that's a much different thing. And you know, bluegrass are just like anybody. They're so nice and they're so welcoming, and they're like, well, you know, come on, that don't matter. You know, they want to learn. They want to know what songs you know. Because you know, you might forget a song, and I might play something they might remember. And I have so then I found that, and I do thumb picking and like Travis picking.
Oh yeah,
that's a real Kentucky way of picking. Merle Travis, one of my guitar heroes, and none of those guys did that. You know, so I kind of had that on them a little bit. And I wasn't that good at it, but back then, but I've been working on it since then. And so it was great, and they allowed me to. They didn't care if you made mistakes. They don't care, you know, whatever. And then they go, you know, and I'd steal some licks here, next thing you know, a few years later, shit, I'm playing bluegrass music, right? So then we started putting it into I started doing it into a tasting, and now we match specific songs with specific whiskeys and bring the story of the history and the story and the people alive through that.
So how does that work? What's an example? How do you make that work?
So at Heaven Hill, we have such an array of products. So and they didn't seem to care. Like if you're at another company and they're held by stockholders and it's just, you know, the budget comes from this one brand. And well, that's all you can talk about.
Right.
You know, so, well, wait a minute, you've made more than that. Well, that's where your budget comes from. I know, but we're talking about this. I mean, it was frustrating. When I got over to Heaven Hill, though, I'm like, gosh, you know, I think I can tell the story of how bourbon became bourbon through the whiskeys. So what if we start with, you know, because what Evan Williams was making in 1783 wasn't this. It was not this. Right. What Elijah Craig was making in 1789 wasn't this. You know, it was just corn whiskey coming off the still.
Right.
And that would be a corn whiskey called Georgia Moon that we make, an unaged corn whiskey.
Sure.
So we have people sip that while we're playing good old Mountain Dew from Grandpa Jones, from Niagara, Kentucky. Remember from Hee Haw, hey, Grandpa, what's for supper? And he'd be the guy, you know, right?
Yeah.
And so that's Grandpa Jones. He was one of the guys in bluegrass. And banjo player Steve, he toured with Grandpa Jones for years. So we play that song while you're sipping don't you think that brings the story alive a little more?
I love it. So now you're pairing whiskeys with songs, like based off of like emotions and history. And
the history of American music.
Right?
These are songs that reach back
who Grandpa Jones was. And then right on the Ohio River in Niagara, Kentucky, down there near Henderson and all that. So then we go to the first evolution of what's going to become bourbon. And that's aged corn whiskey. So we have a brand called Mellow Corn.
Mellow corn, of course.
So when we sip on the mellow corn and tell about how mellow corn was, because that was just shipping it in a used barrel. You know, because they got barrels from Pittsburgh and all that down. So you're going to fill it up. So they would burn the inside of the barrel out to sterilize it from the pickling agents that were in there from whatever was in there before. And so just like 200 years ago, it's aged in a used barrel, because that helps remain the corn flavor. And as we're sipping on that mellow corn, well, we play a 200-year-old song called Copper Kettle.
Oh, yeah.
Get your copper kettle, get your copper coal, you know, fill it with new made corn mash, and never will you toil.
I need to go to one of these shows.
As you lay beneath the junipers while the moon shines bright, watching them jugs a filling by the moonlight. I mean, come on.
Man, I love it. I'm a musician myself. I play the drums, but I
want to go to the tasting right now.
I love the idea of pairing whiskey with music. Is such a cool, novel idea. I love that you do that.
And then we talk about bottle and bond. I've kind of been known as the bottle and bond guy. I've been talking about bottle and bond before anybody. Well,
yes, you are.
People were talking about it, But that's all I love it. I've got Bourbon
you got
tattoo.
I was gonna say,
It's written on you. Yeah.
I mean, so we do that, and we talk because that came about in 1897. Okay, so 1897. Let me show you this.
Bottle and Bond Act.
Yeah. So
Before the FDA was ever established.
There you go.
So I carry this with me. Right?
Oh, is it?
Oh, it's a Morgan. 1897. I love that you carry this with you.
So
Is that
that's
right?
the year
It's
that the
amazing.
Bottle and Bond Act was passed.
Yeah,
It's
it's a Morgan. It's an
1897.
old Morgan
That's
dollar.
Lady Columbia. That she's on the Capitol building.
Oh yeah,
Look
That's from
at
definitely.
that.
1897.
That's right, yeah.
But there's a
Wow.
Morgan. Yeah.
Yep.
What weight to that?
Yeah, but so these kind of things bring the history alive, right?
That's amazing.
Oh, yeah.
And
Absolutely do.
then when Prohibition comes around, we play a song called "Hello Trouble."
Yeah.
It's an old Buck
I know
Owens
that
tune, right?
song,
Because
yeah.
you can see it. You can see Prohibition because they passed the law a year before it went into effect. And then, so January 15th, 1920 was the last night you could get a legal drink. So they called
Yeah.
it Thirsty Thursday. You know that
Thirsty
story.
Thursday.
Thirsty
Uh-huh.
Thursday.
Mhm.
So it'd be like, they saw that coming down the sidewalk just as plain as day. Hello, trouble. Well, come on, So we play that song. So it's taken years and years and years to figure out just what songs to put with what things, but it's been so much fun.
I love
And then
it.
when I get to do it with the band,
Yeah.
sometimes I do it, by myself. Can't afford to have the band travel all the time.
Yeah.
But when we get to do it with the band, it's even more impactful. So
Yeah, amazing. So you are known as the face and the personality of Heaven Hill. You've really helped launch the brand. I mean, you are one of the most, I would say, famous people in Kentucky for the faces of whiskey.
Yeah.
This is my first time meeting you.
Okay.
It's truly an honor. Everybody loves to talk about you. Everyone
well.
waxes poetic about how amazing a person you are.
thank you.
Truly.
That's nice. to
But
hear.
I'm so curious about your history and how you became Bernie Lubbers and the person that people love. When did you start with Heaven Hill and eventually become like the global brand ambassador?
Well, I came over in 2012. So
Okay.
I was at Jim Beam for 7 years or so.
Yeah.
And Heaven Hill's ambassador moved on to somebody who got me into the industry back in 2005.
Okay.
He had come over to Heaven Hill also from Jim Beam.
Mhm.
So I just kind of followed him, But
Okay.
anyway,
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
just do that. Things were happening. I had a great opportunity. It was tough to leave. It was a tough decision, but I'm still friends with Fred and Freddie and Sandy and
Yeah.
Kay and everybody. So, it's a small community. It's,
Yeah.
like I said, there's only six
Still
legacy
is,
distilleries.
right?
Oh
Right,
my gosh,
right.
it's really amazing. So I came over here,
Yeah.
and I'm one of the faces
Sure,
because
yeah.
we got Mac. We're family owned.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was one of the attractive things being family owned, family operated. I mean, Max comes in my first day or two of work and sits in
Yeah.
my office and he goes, "Hey," and he looked at me and I'll never forget his first words. "You look nothing like I thought you would."
Interesting.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know what that means.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he was just awesome.
Okay.
I mean, this guy is iconic. This guy is as iconic as Sidney Frank.
Yeah.
As
Absolutely.
As Sam Bronfman and
Yeah. He's Max.
He's
Everyone
Max
knows
Sapiri,
Max.
but he's
Yeah.
even more. He's a walking treasure trove of stories and history and that. And then you've got his daughter Kate and son-in-law Alan. You got Connor O'Driscoll.
Yeah. We just spent the day with
yeah,
Connor.
I got to work with Parker Beam when I first came over
Parker,
here.
yeah.
He was on my Mount Rushmore of
True legend.
bourbon legends, and so
Yeah.
to be able to work with Fred Noe and Parker Beam and his son Craig and them now Connor and Denny Potter who was there too.
Yeah.
You get to work, and then there's all these other people like Tawny Godey, who's with our company. She's been with our company for 33 years. She started at Heaven Hill when she was 19 years old.
Wow.
And now she's probably the tops of what she does in the world.
Yeah.
And she has a high school diploma.
That's
That's the cool thing about the bourbon industry. It's really not thank God it's not about, because my grades were terrible.
Yeah.
But it's about what you do and what you do
Yeah,
with
of
it in your
course.
experience. And Jody Filiatru, who's
Oh,
our
Jody
artisanal
is-
distiller,
yeah.
he's been with us
Oh,
for
he's
42
amazing.
years. Another guy who started when he was 20
well,
at
Jody
the
is
industry.
just-
And
yeah.
he
And
was in
icon.
warehousing for 30 years. So I was always learned early, you talk to all the people who've been here for 20, 30, 40 years. You get to know everything that you can and learn from them.
Sure.
And you're not going to learn in a minute, right?
Yeah.
So you just want to be around them all the time. So I always try to keep in touch with all these people at the distilleries and other distilleries,
Mhm.
because we can relate with each other.
Right.
How many people? There's not many people do it. There's not many
Yeah.
ambassadors really.
True.
Yeah,
So I like to have. I have all different ambassadors and distillers over to my house every couple months.
Is that right? Yeah.
And then the releases that we have come out, I'll blind taste them on that, and they'll bring a couple things. We do a bottle share and things like that. But it's not like we're competing against each other. Yeah. And we are. Mm-hmm. But the way I look at it is Jack Daniel's, which is an amazing brand, sells about 17 million cases a year. That outsells the entire bourbon category combined.
Yeah. Wow.
So we have to work together, right?
Yeah.
We have to be friendly. Because, you know, there's a little competition there.
Yeah.
We want to outsell Jack, right?
How have things changed since you got in, or even before, because you grew up with this? But today, I mean, it's different from back then.
But I didn't grow up with it like in a distilling family or a certain way. So it was just a thing, you know. My first favorite bourbon was old Granddad Bottle and Bond. And that's kind of why I made Bottle and Bond my thing.
Cheers to that, yeah.
So that's why I made Bottle and Bond my thing. I'm like, nobody's talking about Bottle and Bond.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know it at the time. I realized as a stand-up comedian for 20 years, I was horrible, you know, trying to promote myself. Because that's a hard thing about being a musician or an entertainer. Unless you have a manager.
Yeah.
Because you can't go, hey, I'm really good. You got to have that person do that story for you.
Absolutely, yeah.
So you got to find your thing. So I know with comedy or music, you got to have a hook. You got to have a thing. So I decided early I was going to make Bottle and Bond and words on labels my thing. Because nobody else, that could be my thing. Because I'm not a distiller or a family member. So, but I could make that my thing.
Yeah.
And that's why to this day I still carry it around, because if I have a question, you can pull it out and you go, let's look together.
Yeah.
Because they'll say, well, straight whiskey doesn't mean 2 years old. Wait a minute, let's pull it out. You know, let's read it. And then you're learning together. But then years later, I was at this, I was a motivational speaker, and they said, what are you going to be famous for? And I went, wow. I didn't realize at the time I was doing that. You know, I just said, nobody's doing this. I want to do this.
Right.
But it really did. And I'm like, man, if I'd have known that 20 years before, that could have made the comedy thing a little not easier, but whatever. But you know, but it's really interesting to, and that's when I tell people that want to be an ambassador, or they say, oh, I want to do what you do. I was like, be careful. You know, this isn't for everybody. It's their job. It's not for everybody.
Okay.
How many ambassadors have you met that did it more than 2-3 years?
Yeah, most of them move on. It's tough. It's tough work.
Well, you know, your liver starts hurting.
Yeah, sure. Well, that is
a little bit. You know?
That is true. Yeah.
I mean, it's constant travel. It's always having to be on. It's making small talk with strangers you'll never see ever again the rest of your life. And then you see some people, but you don't remember where they were from. But you know, okay, about half the drink in, you remember. And then you have to be on. You have to be always curious and always learning, always wanting to learn. And that's not for everybody. Yeah. And then most people get married, they have a kid, they can't travel as much, and boom, they're doing something else.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm the only one. I think I'm the longest serving ambassador that's in the American whiskey that's not a distiller or a family member. Yeah. I've been doing it 19 years now.
All right.
So it's kind of cool. I love it. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, you love it. I mean, what motivates? What is that thing that makes you come back every day and say, I love this. I want to keep doing this.
It's general curiosity. Seeing when you're playing music for people and putting the tasting together. I mean, I've seen people cry, you know, because they're like, my dad sang me that song, or my grandpa sang that song, or I'm doing that kind of stuff. You know, and music can be emotional. It can trigger memories. It can be inspirational, all that kind of stuff. So you just don't know who you're going to touch. We also tell the story of, we tell the story of Arnold Schultz, African-American gentleman from Ohio County, and he influenced Bill Monroe and Merle Travis. Yeah. And if it wasn't for Merle Travis, there wouldn't be Chet Atkins, there wouldn't be Jerry Reed, right? Oh, if it wasn't for Bill Monroe, there wouldn't be, there's also in that near Arnold Schultz, there was Ike Everly. He was the barber there, and they played guitars and stuff there. Yeah. And Ike Everly, that last name sound familiar?
Yeah, Everly Brothers.
That's Don and Phil's dad.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, okay.
So, and if it wasn't for the Everly Brothers, there wouldn't be the Rolling Stones. There wouldn't be the Beatles, all that kind of stuff. Right, and Simon and Garfunkel, all that kind of stuff. Right. So, you know, this one gentleman that people know, you know, that Bill Monroe always talked about, and Merle Travis always talked about. Yeah. But it just, that story went away. And we did a tasting with the Camp Runamuck folks, where 200 bartenders come in, and you've got people from New York and from different ethnic backgrounds come up, and you're like, we've never heard of this person,
Really?
and to be able to shed a light on not just Arnold Schultz, but you got people like Tawny, who people don't talk about. You got people like Tommy, who is Tommy Kroom over at Jim Beam, who ran the distillery for many years. These are the people that are, the distillery managers.
Yeah.
They're not the master distiller, but they make the damn thing go, right? And they're just as heroes as everybody else.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Bottle and Bond, I have to ask, working with Heaven Hill for so long, what are some of your favorite expressions or releases over the past 10, 15 years that you've maybe been a part of or tasted? Do you have anything that was like a huge aha moment where like, that's my favorite?
Well, I'm lucky to sit on the innovation team with Connor O'Driscoll and Jody and a bunch of other folks. And we do get to kind of hone in, Tawny and her team on the sensory team, they kind of get it. So there's this, if it's going to be a Heaven Hill Select or a Parker Select or a William Heaven Hill, well, we know those barrels are going to be this age or this whatever, but we're kind of dialing in the proof.
Yeah.
And we're the small thing. We know it's good. We just want to make sure it's on track and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm lucky to do that. The 20-year corn whiskey from a couple years ago, because I'm a big mellow corn fan and corn whiskey fan. If it wasn't for aged corn whiskey like mellow corn, as the first evolution from unaged corn whiskey to what we know today, so we wouldn't have bourbon today. So I call aged corn whiskey, that's the missing link. It's the catfish that crawls out of the lake onto the ground, right? And points the way towards bourbon, what bourbon could be. Right?
Yeah.
Because think about this. It wasn't until 1938, after Prohibition, that the law for the brand new charred barrel went in.
Right. Everything was different.
Everything before that. Do you think that if it wasn't a law that everybody was using a brand new charred barrel every time?
Yeah, of course not.
Right. Yeah.
No. Yeah, of course not.
Yeah.
So everything was a little bit like mellow corn.
Yeah.
Up until 1942. Right.
Yeah.
Because you're going to put it in a barrel and age it for 4 years.
Yeah,
It used to be
why you're
bottle
going to reuse the
So
barrel.
think about that. So we have to, and that's why it's cool working at Heaven Hill, because no other major distillery has an aged corn whiskey.
Yeah.
And it's a small little brand called Mellow Corn, and everybody else would kill it. But Max and Kate now in the family, they're like, no, what if, think about 12 years ago, how many rye whiskeys were on the shelf?
Yeah.
4 or 5?
Right.
Now there's hundreds. What if corn whiskey is the next one? So being a family-owned company, we got it. We got a 4-year head start on our competitors.
Yeah.
Very true.
Well, and mellow corn, I gotta say, I mean, those who know, they know.
They know.
It is a good whiskey.
So that 20-year corn
Massive
whiskey
cult
was
following.
really a cool thing, and I've been tasting that whiskey for 10 years, and it really didn't come into its own until about 17, 18 years.
Yeah.
Because it's in a used barrel on a low floor. It wasn't getting much. That was cool. I always liked I like the
really
golden
cool.
anniversary too with Parker's.
Oh yeah.
That's what there was whiskey from every decade. The Parker
That was
there was
so
whiskey
cool.
from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s in it. That was a special bourbon.
That was really cool.
There's some cool William Heaven Hills. There's a 12-year-old William Heaven Hill that's it's a purple label.